Hi, everybody. I'm Dan Doran with Quantive, founder of Quantive, mid-market investment banking group. I am here with Dean Nordlinger from Rome. Today, we're talking about employee incentive plans, and specifically how they might fit into a potential ownership transition or an eventual exit, change of control type situation. So excited to be talking about this. Dean, over to you.
Great, thanks, Dan. So I'm Dean Nordlinger with Rome. I'm a partner in our firm's DC office. Mine is a business and corporate practice. As a firm, one of our disciplines is aerospace, defense, and government services industry focus. I spend a lot of time representing clients, buy side and sell side through their life cycle, startup to exit. And today I'm proud to tell you, we have with us today a client, a good guy, who is an individual that is highly experienced in government contracting, well embedded in the GovCon ecosystem. He's an owner and executive whose roots began in small business government contracting, and then he successfully operated and navigated his company beyond small to successfully traverse the chasm from small business to full and open, and then ultimately successfully sold the company. So with that, Avi, I'm going to turn it over to you to introduce yourself and give a quick background.
Sure. Thank you very much, Dean, and Dan as well. My name is Avi Benes. I am the former CEO of IMPAQ LLC, government contractor focusing on research and evaluation in social programs, healthcare, education, labor, workforce, international development. And yeah, as Dean mentioned, we had a company, ran it for roughly 20 years as a family-owned, privately held business. And ultimately in 2020, sold the company. But it's a pleasure to be here.
Great. So Avi, let's put a little more context here. As you said, IMPAQ was a closely held family business. You guys did have a robust, aggressive, organic and inorganic growth strategy. And we all know that in the GovCon ecosystem, there's definitely a not so quiet war for talent. How do you retain the right people, attract them, keep them? And we happen to know that, for you and your path in terms of what you did, and I want you to go into more detail about it, you really pursued a path of bringing people into the fold, but doing it without issuing actual equity. So can you talk to us a little bit about big picture, why you chose the path you chose?
Sure. Big picture, we ran a government contractor where, our business model was really billing out people's time. And so we'd win projects and, we had a mix of cost plus fixed fee, time and materials, firm fixed price contracts. But ultimately the business was hiring strong talent that the government wanted to work on their projects. And so how do you do that? You have to compensate people competitively, and generously, and enough to make it worth their while to come and join your business. But I think the real thing that maybe differentiated IMPAQ from some of our competitors was our general philosophy that we don't hire for specific projects. I think a lot of government contractors out there would say, they were either to be crass, kind of a butts in the seat model, or, wouldn't hire ahead of actually winning the project. We would hire talent that we thought we would be able to essentially leverage in order to win more work. And so we would go out in front of those projects, which sometimes can be scary because now you're carrying a salary that you don't have the revenue backing it up, right? On day one to cover. But we would hire based on this kind of idea that you're going to go out and either win work or be a part of a team that wins work, and more than pay for yourself.
Got it.
So Avi, with that said, in this war for talent, you hear lots of stories about, I want to go out and hire a chief growth officer and they're looking for a slice of equity or options or, some sort of call on the, the equity ownership of the business. How'd you guys approach this? Tell us a little bit about what you either did or experienced there.
Yeah. Well, we had several conversations and thoughts about whether or not we ultimately would want to issue equity to employees. And reality is we never got to that juncture. And I mean, part of it might have been, hey, if we held the company for another 5-10 years, maybe we would have. But we tried to avoid it in a couple of different ways. One, doesn't pay anything, right? It gives you kind of that option for future value one day, but trying to explain to people, hey, this doesn't mean it's hard to go out and use the equity and impact to go and buy a new car because
can't put beer on the table.
It has no real intrinsic value until ultimately the sale. Second is we looked for ways in order to compensate people more directly, and so we had I'd say we had a competitive salary structure for people. Obviously, we had an annual bonus, which was 100% in cash. We had a 401k plan, and then we established a supplemental employee retirement plan, which to us was the closest thing we ever got to kind of issuing equity to equity rewards, if you will, to employees, because that money would be obviously earmarked for that employee, but on a vesting schedule that was both, incentivize the employee to stay, hopefully, but also boosted up their retirement plan.
Right. So, we spent a lot of time with clients working on bigger picture corporate strategy, and this is one of the things. And so, highest level, when you think about employee incentives and what you're doing, there's not a one size fits all. There are things you do, as you noted, hey, look, let's reward people in the moment, right? There's no retention in that. There's some things you can do in the midterm that are, hey, we recognize you. We're going to put some money here for you that you'll earn over time. And then in the long term is, hey, if and when we sell, there'll be something for you as well. Mm-hmm. So with that context, can you, to the extent you did, can you talk about in whatever way you dovetail your overall employee incentive plan strategy with IMPAQ's growth strategy and the thought that, hey, at some point we are going to sell? Did you in any way sort of look to make those two work together in tandem?
Yeah, we did. We had, so the first part is kind of the basic part is the salary increases and bonus structure were tied to performance. And we dabbled with, do you make it a specific formula? I never loved those specific formulas because you're going to have good years and bad years and you still want to get compensated, or you're going to be carrying your colleague, your office mate one year and hopefully share in the spoils. Ultimately, it's better for everybody longer term. Mm-hmm. And those formulas they're always, the couple of times we put a formulaic method in for employee compensation, there's always that unintended consequence that you don't quite realize when you create it, that I'm tying it to revenue. Well, now we have all this low margin revenue. I'm tying it to margin, but we're not going after the things that could help grow the business. There's always something that you didn't intend that has this perverse kind of reward. Mm-hmm. Ultimately, the CERT plan that we gave to employees was paid out on the last day before sale. And so that was a incentive, kind of to your question, tying employee relations or employee compensation to the ultimate exit. And we also did put for several key employees a change of control document in place where they got some extra compensation upon that transaction. It's in this world, like I said, it's a consulting business, right? So anybody that was going to buy the company was really buying it for the employees. And so We wanted the employees to be obviously happy with the transaction and ultimately want to stay on for the new co.
Right. Yeah. Hey, Dan, I'm gonna jump in just for a second. And it's an important topic, and it worked out well for you in what you ultimately did. And there's this notion we talk with clients all the time about whether we're on the buy side or the sell side. Buyers do not pay twice. And what we mean by that is, if a buyer comes and sizes up a potential target company, they're obviously concerned about the stickiness of people. Will they hang? Will they stay? Hey, I got to pay the seller or sellers money, but I also need money unless the seller has done something to create that post-sale stickiness. The buyer is going to have to solve that problem. So it's going to get solved one way or the other. And really, the all-important question there is, have you proactively answered this so you don't have to take a purchase price haircut based on a subjective determination of a buyer about how much money they're going to have to redirect away from you to sprinkle over the key people to make them stay? And so can you, with that context, can you talk a little bit about, because as you said, you did provide for that stickiness. So can you just shed a little light on how you decided what type, percentage, amount, prospectively, how did that factor in your mindset?
Yeah.
Doing?
Right. I mean, I probably should have this conversation with you before the deal, but yeah. The way we thought about it was, so we were a closely held business with really 4 family members that were owners of the ultimate equity that would be compensated upon the transaction or paid for the equity. What we talked to the employees about and kind of put in place with employees was, once we got to this point, so we're selling, we're in bed with an investment banker, we're going down this path, and it's now no longer it's hard to keep it a secret, with at least key employees at a certain point. The idea being, hey, we need X dollars for the equity coming into the equity owner's hands, but we're happy to pay Y dollars to key staff and to incentivize them to perform, up to the last day and then beyond. And the reality is, it's not a linear relationship, because while, the family wants to make it as lucrative of a transaction as possible for them, we didn't need a 1-to-1 ratio in the increase in sales price that would come either to employees or to shareholders. And so, if I'm dancing around it, but if the family didn't need the same percentage out of $100 that they do out of $1,000 to feel like they were getting, compensated accordingly for the equity. And so that changed that incentivized almost the employees to help work towards as high a number as possible.
Got it. Okay. Appreciate that.
So Avi, in hindsight, would you have done any of this portion differently? Either from a timing perspective, from structuring or instrument, any do-overs that you take?
Yeah, I would have been earlier about all of it. I kind of waited until I was really convinced that we were going towards this sales process before I put some of these agreements in place. Yeah. And so while I think, and it's like any agreement, right? One side might think they're being generous, the other side thinks they're being ripped off. If you right. have that kind of upfront and are very forward about it. And I felt like I was always, one of my positive characteristics is kind of my transparency and my communication. I think I could have been more so in this upfront. Right. I don't know how that would have changed behaviors necessarily, but it would have probably changed a couple of relationships.
So just real quick, can you speak to the rough timing there? So if you think backwards from, day of transaction to day of engaging investment bank to this sort of decision, what sort of timeframes are we talking, or would you be talking about there? Best case, and I'm thinking about this in terms of advice for the next founder that is running down this path.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm questioning why I didn't do it for, let's say key employees on day of hire.
Okay.
And say, hey, ultimately, we're trying to create this value. I want you to feel like you're part of creating that value. Here's what you would get if a transaction ever occurred.
So what's really interesting there, when we are, as the investment banker in this process, running the transaction process, we always struggle with who are we reading into the deal, and at what point in time. And what you just said, at time of hire, I am, cat's out of the bag. We are selling this company at some point in the future. And I think most employees know that, but ringing that bell early potentially obviates a bunch of problems down the road for the transaction process and the auction process and confidentiality.
Right. It does. I think looking back on it, that would have been a very interesting technique for us to have used. I think we were scared of it because we didn't want, it's like a prenup almost, right? We didn't want to hire somebody and be like, oh, the company might get sold tomorrow. And we weren't selling the company when we hired, all of these employees. It just, opportunity arose. And so so that's kind of why we didn't do it. Now in hindsight, I'm wondering if that was the wrong concern that we had. And if I ever do start a new company, I would think long and hard about kind of starting the relationship with that agreement.
Yeah.
All right. So let me ask this other question. As you think back across your tenure, the 10 years, you hired a lot of people. Talk about to what extent, if at all, you feel like with the employee incentive plans that you did use, opposed to actually, do you feel like you ever missed out on hiring anybody that you really wanted to bring in, or that you failed to retain any key employees based on the plans that you had?
Yeah, I would say that we probably both to some extent. It is very competitive out there for talent, not only in government contracting, but in every field, it feels like these days.
Right.
And, you run into situations where you think somebody is getting paid the wrong number, right? Versus, you've done the math, you figured out what this person is worth to you, either from a billable perspective or larger than that, or leverageable perspective from an indirect standpoint. And sorry for speaking in kind of government contractingese. Another thing is, it's hard as a small to medium-sized business, especially in government contracting, to compete with the larger guys that have this big pool of G&A dollars, overhead dollars to utilize. While a smaller company is always thinking about, what my billability ratios are so that I can pay for these people. So, yeah, I think we were competitive. Do I think we ever lost anybody over it? I'm sure we did.
Yeah. The one thought I would put on here, because I think this is really important. You as a former owner, and for our audience, again, I go back to a couple of themes, in this territory. One is the fact that there's no one solution. There's no perfect solution. And the reality is there are highly, highly effective ways to put in place agreements without giving people actual equity, whereby you give them the essence of the experience that they really desire, which is to say, hey, I'm going to come to you, I'm going to be loyal to you, I'm going to help build, grow, and when you sell, I just want to feel good and comfortable that there's something in writing that's got me earmarked to win with you, as opposed to the absence of anything like that, where there could be a faint, distant, and not well remembered mental history of the owner or the owners of the company, where there's nothing in writing and now they're not getting it. So which I think is an important point for our audience overall, that it's whether it's actual equity or these types of plans that we talk about as synthetic equity, where they're not real equity, they're highly effective. And it really does come down to, as you said, either the type of company you are, the type of work you're doing, how ephemeral, like how often do people come, how often do they go? You got to really. So anyway, the point is, I don't think you need to be so hard on yourself. Because of the company you built.
No, and I'm also thinking through it, and sorry to use government contracting as my example, but it's the world that I know most recently. Those bonuses, the 401ks, the CERT plans are, you can essentially bill them back to your customer via kind of a fringe expense. And I don't, can you bill back an equity compensation? I don't think you can. So it's costing the owners something, but they can't get any reward from, they can't charge a customer more for it. So it's a hard equation to solve for an owner of a government contracting business.
No doubt.
So Avi, keeping the eye on the clock here, maybe one final question here, unless Dean's going to jump in with another. But if you are sitting here thinking about our audience, a founder that is not quite to your point, somewhere along this curve of trying to get through growth to that point of transaction, any advice, any suggestions when it comes to employee retention, compensation, et cetera?
So I heard of one radical compensation idea that I wanted to institute, and I got shut down by family members, key executives, and I've always wanted to try it, and I haven't. And I wonder if any of the listeners have tried it, and I'd love to hear their responses. But it's every employee, let's say you can either do it once a year, you can do it once a quarter, you can do it maybe even every day you can do it. Every employee has the option to come into the boss's office and say, this is the number that I need. And the boss has to then make the determination, either pay me that number or show me the door. This
is like a movie script.
I love it.
This is like a culling.
And everybody's like, no, that is way too cutthroat. I'm like, no, it's the best way I can think of to get to what the underlying value of any employee is. Now, do I have the guts to pull something like that off? Does it say something on me that I'm too cutthroat? That I'm not sure, but I'd be interested in maybe the next business giving some variation of that a try.
Well, it'll be interesting when you start that next business. If anybody watches the tail end of this episode, what your applicant pool starts to look like, how that interview process starts to unfold.
I mean, think about it from the employee standpoint. How much you don't have to come into my office and demand anything. You can just keep getting paid this. How much do you believe in yourself that you're willing to risk getting shown the door if I don't think you're worth that number? I don't know. It's an idea. It's a little crazy.
High stakes, man.
Yeah.
It is.
All right. Well, Avi, thank you so much for your time today. This has been a pleasure listening to your experience and just your knowledge, having gone through this journey once in highly successful fashion. So thank you kindly for agreeing to spend some time with us and our audience today.
Yep. Thanks, Avi.
Thank you. I enjoyed it.
Okay.